Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Lovers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement. That's a quarterly European magazine and also bi-weekly newsletter. And we have a huge LinkedIn group with over 50,000 members worldwide. So that's my responsibility. And I'm also the architect of the IT supply map. We talk about it later. Positioning all kind of supply chain software vendors in Europe. And one of them is Descartes, and we have this as an expert today. Today we have a live webinar in the next 60 minutes. We're going through a survey they have been done recently, and the title is Growth Through Disruption. How are you investing in transportation management? So we have an interesting findings of the status of transport management and the relation to supply chain and growth. All right. So, like I said, I have an expert with me. So that's Elmer Spruit. Welcome.
Thank you, Martijn. Great to be here today.
And he has a background, also a long time with Accenture, and later on with Schiphol. That's an online brokerage platform and supply chain. And since 2021, he is responsible for transport management EMEA at Descartes as a vice president. You studied the Master of Science in Physics and Astronomy a long time ago. Do you still have some value out of your studies from a long time ago relating to now?
Well, I typically joke that sometimes it feels that when something goes wrong with a shipment, it feels like a black hole occurred and stuff disappears. No, but it's not super concrete, although logistics is a complex puzzle with a lot of data, and that's to a certain extent comparable with physics or astrophysics. So in that sense, it's close to me.
Yeah, and what are the conversations you are having the most recently in your business?
Yeah, I think with a lot of companies, they're today looking, and we'll come back to that later with the findings on how they can take more ownership of their supply chain or their logistics process. I think that's really an interesting development for certainly the last year, where we have more discussion where they either outsourced parts of the logistics or even the planning around it to a 3PL and forwarder, and now cargo owners and shippers are looking for ways to manage that themselves and be more in control of what's going on.
Okay, we'll talk about it later. All right, some practical things. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available on YouTube within 48 hours. The presentation will also be made available as PDF. The audience, you are all on mute, but if you can see on the right-hand side, you can use the chat functionality. I won't track that, but if you have questions to Elmer or me, please use the Q&A functionality down below. You see the small text bubbles, and you can ask your questions, and you can even vote of other people's questions. If these questions are in line of the conversation I will be having with Elmer, I will ask these questions immediately. If not, I reserve the questions for the Q&A at the end. And the good news is, after the Q&A, we have an extra 30 minutes where we will be sitting down in the virtual lounge. So you will be able to see us over there after the whole webinar. As of now, we'll putting off our camera so you can enlarge your screens, and then you have a better view on the slides. All right. So like I mentioned, I'm the architect of the IT supply map, and this is the 2025 version of this year. So you see all kind of supply chain vendors, WMS, TMS, SNOP, ERP on it, very well-known names. And they have all kind of distinction, and sometimes they have a subway station that is showing expertise in a certain area. And as you can see, Descartes has several subway stations, WMS, TMS, also global freight management and freight procurement in that area. So that's a broad range of kind of solutions they are providing. And a lot of them, or most of them, in the cloud. But maybe, Elmer, you can tell me a bit more about Descartes as a company.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so Descartes, we're a global company where our headquarters are in Canada. And we're now, I think, close to 2,500 logistic geeks or experts that are dedicated to improving how logistics is being run by companies worldwide. you see some of the numbers in terms of revenue. We're a publicly traded company. We've been growing for the last 20 years. So that's really the logistics, creating software that helps to improve it. That's really our bread and butter.
Yeah. Can you tell me a bit more about your customer base?
Yeah, so our customers, as logistics is a game of communication and interaction between cargo owners and shippers and LSPs and carriers, and we have solutions that are dedicated to, let's say, both groups. So, of course, we cannot put 26,000 logos on the slide, but here's a few, probably a bit bigger and more recognizable names that we're helping with managing their logistics.
All right. So okay, now we'll get to the survey. You have done the survey several times. But maybe you can explain a bit more background reason why of the survey, and then we get into the details.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for us, on one hand, we're in the middle of logistics every day. So you could argue, why do we need to have a survey? But I think when we started 9 years ago doing this benchmark every year, we see it does bring a lot of valuable insights for us and for our customers. So we like to have an extensive interaction with a large group, hundreds of cargo owners and LSPs in North America and in Europe. We surveyed and we asked them lots of questions on what are the trends they're seeing in the market, and more importantly, how are they trying to cope with it, right? What's their tactics or what are their strategies to manage them? And what's their, for us, even more important as well, of course, is what's their outlook on technology? How are they using technology? What are they expecting? And it's certainly, if you compare the results year by year, you see very interesting development. So we're really happy with doing this every year.
So, and apart from your survey, we have done also several surveys together last year with some consultancy firms. With Buck Consultants, we have done a global survey in the US and Europe about end-to-end supply chain visibility. And last year, among supply chain executives in Europe, I did an extensive survey on supply chain transformation and tooling with the FSO consultancy. So maybe I can also relate these data from those surveys to this survey, and we give a broader view of what's happening in the supply chain. All right, maybe first some key findings, and then later on we have a deep dive on each of these items. So what is most remarkable if you look at the findings?
Yeah, and we only have an hour today. There's much more content that we can talk about for hours. But indeed, let's say one of the several of the key findings, I would say, is that we've seen this year for the 9th time now that we did it, that the role that supply chain or transportation management plays in companies is being more and more appreciated. So we had more than 80% really saying, hey, this is a competitive weapon, how we manage our transportation. I think that's a very positive outcome. We're really happy with it. At the same time, and that's maybe the section below it, right? If we ask those companies about how much automation do they have in their supply chain, there's still work to be done, with only 17% saying, hey, we're fully automated. So there's lots of manual activity still going on. There's some improvements over the years, right? It's not that it's not growing, but still a long way to go. Yeah, of course, maybe not a surprise, but generative AI is top of mind for a lot of companies. So they are experimenting with it, and we'll come back to that later on what they're doing. I think another interesting thing is that the outlook is pretty positive. At least I was expecting a bit more with all the turbulence going on in the world from tariffs and typical or potential war efforts in different regions. But still, there's quite a lot of companies expecting significant growth and also more investment in their TM capabilities. I think that's a nice one. And if we zoom in on capabilities, we'll have a specific slide on it later. And we still see that visibility is really important for a lot of companies, but also how they manage performance of their LSPs and carriers. And a new one, I think, is more carrier monitoring in terms of insurance and fraud. So that's also coming up in certainly in the US.
Yeah. No, we will get to these individual points later on. The overall view, and I concur with what you're saying, is that since the last 2-3 years, especially last 2 years, I think there's a lot of more attention to supply chain execution. Whereas pre-COVID, it was all sales and operations planning, the planning part, the longer horizon beyond 3 months or 6 or 18 months. Now we see lately sales and operations execution as a major topic. How do you make the plans work and execute on them? So your supply chain execution is on the top of mind of a lot of supply chain officers within manufacturing, wholesale, and retail companies. And that's reflecting on the first point you mentioned, that transportation as part of supply chain execution is becoming more and more important. All right.
Yeah. And maybe Martijn, just to add to that, I think it's so within the logistics or supply chain domain, it's great that we're more convinced of, hey, this is a strategic asset. At the same time, there are still lots of companies who struggle with giving the right priority to supply chain or logistics initiatives, right? There's still a lot of ERP programs or other programs that take priority. And that's a pity, because there's so much value from indeed optimizing your working capital, cost savings. There's really a ton of things that you can really material change by optimizing your supply chain. So also there's still work to be done, specifically maybe to the community outside of the supply chain.
Yes, we will talk about later how to sell your supply chain project internally to your CFO. I have some real comments on that, but we'll get to that later point, because first go through the findings and then we get to this point later on. Maybe here, tell us about the transportation management strategy. What are the major findings?
Yeah, I think what is interesting, maybe also supporting some of the logistics executives that we interviewed, that we typically are downloading also our benchmark, is that we try to look at correlation or potentially even call by the growth of a company and how important they look at their supply chain, right? So here we've seen that there's still quite a significant group that expect more than 5% growth per year. That's significant. But what's also interestingly is that we see that companies who view their transportation management capability as really important, they are performing much better financially. Yeah. So of course it's not per se say, hey, if you view it from one day to the other as more important, then your financials will grow. But we'll see throughout the survey that there's various points where there is a clear correlation between valuing the importance of your logistics or transportation management capability and your financial performance.
Yeah, and I think when I have conversations with supply chain executives and supply chain directors, so mid-level, I think the better performing companies, they do see supply chain as a growth facilitator. If you're growing, if you're selling more, and you are not able to execute in an efficient way, it doesn't add to your bottom line. So in that sense, I see that the supply chain is a facilitator of growth. Without a good supply chain, you are not able to grow. And to put it differently, in the better companies, they don't see supply chain as a cost center, but a part of the business or a facilitator of growth. And that's the conversation we should be having. And hopefully, I think these findings are supporting that. And you mentioned, a growth greater than 50%. So it's still 12% believing, they will see a larger growth. And compared to a few years ago, it has been gone down, but still 12% thinking that they will grow way more than the average in GDP or economically wise. That's still a lot.
Yep.
All right. If you look at the trends, what do you see here as major findings?
Yeah, I think it's not surprisingly that we see that a lot of executives view tariffs and trade restrictions as important trends that are impacting transportation management over the next few years. The same for inflation or rising costs. and fuel costs. Although the first two are more cited by North American companies, so they expect a bigger impact, which I understand, considering the political situation. And you see, on the other hand, that, for example, in Europe, environmental regulations is a bit higher on the agenda, which of course is also, I think, quite logical if you see what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned in the prep call we had earlier that the first one, the first bar, tariffs and trade restriction, that's the new one compared to last year's survey. So
Yeah.
So I think there's no way around it with the tariff turmoil. So I think that is leading a lot already to a lot of interesting moves. So you see a lot of companies, especially from Europe and Asia, front loading their shipments to the US in Q1 before it all started happening, and then in Q2 you saw a dip in transportation globally, and then it was moving up again. So you see a lot of bullwhips, global bullwhips in transportation. And I think that's all related to transport management. Is it also something you see on your side with your usage among your companies, your clients?
Yeah, for sure. So we see huge shifts in volumes, and indeed we saw quite a lot of front loading going on, and then later on a dip, and some lanes or region to region trade was going down really significantly over 50%. So there has been quite a lot of unrest. I think lately, and that's maybe just from the last. Just before the summer, I think things more or less stabilized, at least for some of the regions. So taking that into account, I would expect today potentially that the impact is maybe expected a little bit lower, but it's still nice. On the previous slide, we saw, although these unrests, there's still quite some growth expected. So I think that's positive.
Yeah. And you mentioned, environmental regulations is number 4 in Europe. There's a regulatory change and impact. We have seen similar findings in our own surveys among supply chain executives in Europe. So in the long term, I think it's number 2 as the most important macro trend. But on the short term, it's dropping to number 5. And then you see that cost containment and digitalization is number 1. So unfortunately, for a lot of board of directors among cargo owners, manufacturing companies, sustainability is dropping down to number 5. So there are other urgent matters. And that's also reflecting here if you see fuel costs and inflation as number 3 and 2 is also on this side. So you see it in that line also. Driver shortage. Do you see differences between the US and Europe?
Yeah, I think it's more a topic in the US, although we'd also see shortage in Europe, or at least the difficulty to find it, right? So it's not completely not here, but there are some differences there.
And also what I see, I've done also similar webinars earlier, the US is way more a bigger spot market on road transportation than Europe. And that's also reflected on the shortages. If if you are on the spot market and there is no driver and there is no truck available, then you have a problem. So it's also a matter of, I think that the US is a lot larger percentage is a spot market compared to Europe.
Yep.
Yeah. And geopolitical unrest, we still see things happening in the Red Sea, and it takes longer to get your container from China to Europe, etc. So that's also reflecting here, but that's more on the sea freight, etc. This survey is both on sea freight and road freight and rail cargo, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it's covering all modes. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good to know. All right. Other trends, maybe what you see here?
Yeah, it's you could argue maybe a trend or a strategy. I think it's interesting to see what's driving more usage and more of a TMM, or expanding the capabilities And we also see over the years differences for companies why they decide to invest more in a TMS. And I think what we've seen this year is that business growth, again, maybe the positive outlook is expected to be a key driver in expanding the use of a TMS or invest in one. Next to improve customer service, right, which is also, I think, a positive topic. I mean, it's on the agenda for a longer time. A lot of those visibility discussions are often around, hey, how can I make sure my customer gets the right data at the right time on when they can expect their shipment. And cost reduction has reduced a bit. And here you will also see that, again, there's a correlation between the companies that expect or that financially performing well versus ones that are not doing so well, and also see transportation is more as a necessary evil. For them, cost reduction is a much higher driver of investing in a TMS.
Yeah. What I also see in conversation I'm having with supply chain executives, mainly the cargo owners, manufacturing and wholesale and retail companies, is that they want to have a better grasp on their performance on end-to-end supply chain, visibility, etc. So I see more and more companies who may outsource some logistics, warehousing, transportation to 3PL companies or LSPs, that they do want to own their own WMS or their own TMS to get direct access to this kind of data. And they say, okay, if they outsource the operations, they say, okay, to an LSP, you can use my software, my TMS, my WMS. I think that's a trend I see more and more in the last 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we touched upon it earlier, right? Indeed, where they maybe when they started and it was easy, they didn't have their own operational capability and they outsourced it. And now they see that the TMS is also more mature, it's more advanced. It's easier to have to optimize your own logistics process. You don't need to outsource it fully to LSP. So that's certainly also an important factor. Yes.
Yeah, and we did, like I said, a survey among 81 supply chain executives in Europe with the vessel management consultant. And when they were asked the most important digital and AI tool for the supply chain transformation, number one was end-to-end control towers with 57%. So these executives are aware that they want to have end-to-end control towers, and as part of it, that's also a lot to do with transportation management. So that's also in line with that sense. Going on, if you see what's driving the transport management expansion, we've touched that. But if you continue, what's the sharing information? What's the need, and what are the findings in the survey?
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting question, and certainly ones at Descartes, maybe where Descartes is founded, you could say, on the principle that we want to facilitate the sharing of information. We have a huge network of hundreds of thousands of connected companies, so we're always a bit more keen to understand, how companies are using that information and how they are sharing it. I think one of the findings that we see this year and actually in the last few years is that overall we see much more departments or teams are being named as they get information. So data sharing overall to various parties, either supply chain operations or carriers, suppliers, customers, all of them are increasing. So I think that's positive. It feels like maybe the days of sort of the offline TMSs are over, or at least reduced, because it's getting more and more important to have a system which is able to share the right information in your own organization and with all the parties typically involved in logistics. And again, also in this question, we saw a nice correlation with companies who are performing better are also sharing more information. So that seems to be also another indicator of something that's really positive and also has a financial impact.
Yeah. If you look at this findings and this data, it's obvious. You want to have information sharing with your carriers who are transporting your goods. So that's one thing. What is of interest to see, that in the end you see suppliers, 41%, customers also similar, but you hope to have that this bar will on the same level as supply chain operation overall. That overarching inbound logistics and outbound logistics. So inbound from your suppliers, outbound to your customers. That the information sharing will be the same in the end, so that these bars will at the same high level of supply chain operations. Then you have really overarching end-to-end supply chain visibility, and it's not just only inbound or only outbound, but it's all.
Yep. No, and I think we have a nice picture on that later where you indeed see that there's still quite a lot of companies that are relying on emails, Excel sheets, etc., which then makes it difficult to share all the information across all the different parties, right? So it's increasing. I think that's positive.
Yeah.
We're not there yet.
No, and also when you look at it internally, I think that customer service, it's rather low, and sales, okay, but customer service, I would expect that the customer service is also relying more and more on this kind of information to have access. When is my pallet arriving, etc., and will it be late, and that kind of stuff. So yes, it's a positive sign, a positive note, but there's still much to gain. You want to have all these bars at the same highest level, and then you share all this data internally and externally with all the parties involved. Moving on, strategy and tactics. So how are companies preparing for industry and regulatory changes?
Yeah, and this is indeed where we probe a bit into what are companies doing and what are they expecting to how are they expecting to manage the different changes that we also discussed before. And I think what we've seen, by the way, also in the last few years, that investing in technology and of course for us as a technology company that is important, remains the key driver. Of course, there's also quite significant amount of companies that maybe adjust their strategies, right? So we also see some shifts in where maybe suppliers are shipping from, or sometimes factories are even moved, or distribution centers. So there's more than that. But it's investing in technology remains a big an important tactic. And again, we also see that for companies who are leading and see supply chain as a really key capability, they're investing more in technology versus others that see it more as a basic service or necessary evil.
Yeah. So the more competitive companies or more advanced companies, they score 55% invest in technology, whereas defensive are low below 40 is 35%. So you see some differences between the more defensive and offensive companies. Interesting maybe to mention, I did a survey together with Gartner in 2013, and I already had for years the gut feeling that companies in the US have a different view on IT than companies in Europe. And finally, in 2013, I got the statistical evidence. Basically, US companies, they are way more IT savvy. They have a higher belief in IT. They are way more gung-ho. They see $1 million implementation as a pilot, whereas in Europe, 1 million euro that's the implementation of France. That's an actual implementation. So we saw different kind of approaches and views on IT. So American companies have a higher belief in IT. It's also understandable because in Europe, we have different languages, regulations, etc. More fragmented supply chains, and that's the reason why European companies are a bit more skeptic about IT. What's a reflection on that notion?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the complexity in Europe is sometimes making life more difficult. And so we recognize that. So it takes more time, but yeah, in the end, if we look at our network, I mean, so many companies connected, and okay, it took more time over the last 30 years, but I think now we have a pretty good base. So in that sense, yeah, it is a bit more of a challenge, but it's not impossible. And the languages, etc., I think, yeah, is a practical thing, but makes it an implementation more difficult. But I think when we're running a system, then typically that's no longer a real bottleneck.
No.
But yeah, for sure in the US, it's more harmonized market with similar conditions versus the different countries in Europe.
So let's move on and let's talk about how to improve the value of transportation.
Yeah, so I think this is also where we have a lot of discussions with our customers typically about, right? What's really important, and where do they see the value of transportation management, and what's driving that? I think one of the key things is automation, and it's automation in terms of communication, and it's automation in terms of taking decisions automatically by a system, right, which can dynamically reevaluate decisions more or less every minute if you want to. So that's a key important value driver for transportation management. Let's say the new kid in town, at least this year, added to our benchmark is the AI, right? The generative AI, and we'll have a specific slide on it later. But I think for sure, lots and lots of companies are experimenting with it, right? It's not yet, I would say, always a core part of their tool set, but for sure they have some experiments going on. Yeah, and I think and there we go more in the growth agenda. I think number 3 is also important, where we see that there's more companies that see yeah, services to customers as an important driver for value that they get out of a TM. I think that's also really a really important one. And again, we also see here a correlation between indeed the high performing companies that see logistics as a strategic asset versus the ones that see it as a necessary evil. So you see that, for example, in the adopting AI, right? There's a huge difference between those different companies that are different type of companies.
Yeah. So we discussed it briefly in our prep call. I think, in general, my observation that supply chain people have a lesser chance to sell their IT project to the CFO. So I think that when, especially, talk about AI or Gen AI, I think that marketing, IT, and finance are way better to pitch their IT project to the CFO. And I think that, and my observation is that supply chain people are still talking about, we could save a few planners or something like that, or it saves us a lot of time, whatever. And they don't think, maybe you mentioned it briefly, they talk about, carving out working capital. So the language of the CFO. And I think these findings, offer more high value service to the customer. I think supply chain people should translate it, with better transportation management. We make sure that the shelves are not empty, and we always have something to sell. One thing, so don't have missed sales, and working capital being in transit is getting down. So I think we have to also translate the benefits in a sense that CFO is understanding. Okay, this will carve out working capital apart from saving costs.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's a pity because we typically see, if you dynamically optimize your planning of your execution of your supply chain, you have more visibility, more reliability, that inventory levels can go down. And indeed,
Yeah.
the impact of such a development on your working capital is, well, depending a bit on which industry you are, but typically can be really significant. So, it's a pity that we're not always making the business case as convincing as it can be.
No, so to me, the magic words are I can carve out X million euro working capital in 1 year by doing this, and then you can fill in the dots with the supply chain project. So if you say if you can carve out an X amount of million working capital, if you say that to the CFO, he or she will listen. So because that's on his or her agenda, top of mind. So that's what you should work on. And of course, this kind of findings, how do you make this pitch a bit better and give some evidence, and then you get it. If we move on to the importance of sustainability, so how is sustainability reflected in the survey?
Yeah, and I think this is we mentioned before, right? Of course, in Europe, we see sustainability is a little bit higher on the agenda, but overall, we've seen it dropped a few percentage. So I think that's an overall finding, and I think what's also interesting is that we see that still a lot of companies, they see it as a part of their strategic plans, but not so much of their day-to-day decisions. So it seems to be maybe a bit more of a boardroom topic sometimes versus in the day-to-day operation. On the other hand, I mean, there's only 10% that really says, "Hey, we're not seeing it at all," right? So it is often a topic, but it's not yet, I think, really grind in day-to-day decisions that logistics managers are making.
Yeah,
And we see, I think, two other, let's say, views on it. So one is we see shippers and cargo owners are more busy with the topic versus the LSPs and the carriers. And again, we also see that the companies that see transportation management really strategic asset also much more involved and have a higher importance for sustainability versus the other ones.
yeah. So we just finished a supply chain movement quarterly about scope 3. That's the external carbon emissions, so out of your own plants. So that's scope 1 and 2. And basically, what you see, 80% of your carbon emission is out of your own buildings. So that's upstream or downstream, your scope 3. And the cargo owners, the manufacturing companies, most of them are publicly traded, especially the bigger one, and they have to mention in their annual report what they're doing. And of course, the European legislation has been a bit lenient and maybe postponed. But then again, most companies, they have it on their agenda and they have to mention it in the annual reports. And in my opinion, transportation management is an important part for your scope 3 emissions, for your carbon emissions, because most of the cargo owners have outsourced the actual transportation to the carriers. So I think your software is also supporting how to get this scope 3 measurement, real data into your system, so you get also a better feeling and grasp on that.
Yeah, so for sure. So indeed, we help our customers to measure it accurately. I think what maybe is a good news that typically a cost saving is also a sustainability saving. So
Yeah.
if we do less kilometers, or we have a higher percentage of consolidation, or we convert an air shipment into an ocean shipment, all those types of they typically save costs and they also save CO2 emissions. So in that sense, let's say indirectly everybody is quite busy with it.
Yeah.
And it's for sure for all new TMS installations that we do, it's part of their scope, right? So it's sometimes more a hygiene factor than a really day-to-day decision driver.
But I can imagine that the LSPs, the logistics service providers, they should come up with this data, with real data of their carbon emission, because their clients, the shippers, the cargo owners, they are asking for this kind of data. So I think the more advanced LSPs, they do want to have this kind of capabilities to measure these carbon emissions of their own transportation, because it's demanded from their customers.
Yeah. Oh, so and a lot of LSPs indeed are also using our software for it.
Yeah.
But there's, I think, one asterisk, maybe certainly for ocean, but also for road. There is a matter of assigning, right? If you have an LTL shipment,
Yeah,
you can measure the CO2 emissions from a truck, although that's already quite tricky to really measure it, but you can quite accurately estimate it on fuel usage, etc. But then you still need to assign a certain portion to whoever company had stuff in the truck, right? So it's you need some software typically for that.
Yeah, and it makes it way more complex. And you see in Europe there's way more LTL, less than truckload, compared to US, where you have way more full truckloads. So that's also a difference over there.
Yep.
And I think we'll get to this kind of data also somewhere further down the line in the survey. Moving on, so we all want to innovate and possibly grow. So what are the capabilities needed for that purpose?
Yeah, so here we're looking indeed for what's really an important capabilities for you to manage your transportation. And I think, and it was, I think, one of the first slides, right? Visibility remains a key topic that customers really value and is an important component of their TMS. And I think now this year we had two more performance management, right? So with all the data that you can get, certainly if you have visibility in place on geofencing, when certain shipments arrive or leave, etc., you can measure performance of your carriers much more accurately, but also your performance towards your customers. So that's an important component, right? Let's say converting that data into actual insights to better manage the carriers and customers. And I think the number 3 this year was the new one on more on the carrier monitoring, so more the insurance and fraud detection. Although it's more popular in the US, we had higher percentages there. Still, overall, it managed to get on the number 3. Of course, other capabilities also still seen as really important, right? So the execution or communication with carriers, or the routing capability, rating and planning, etc. So it's not just a few. I think overall there's quite a spread of different capabilities that our companies find really important in their transportation management.
But if you look overall to the graphs here, it looks like over time, 2021 to 25, the graphs are going down. So I can imagine in 2023, past COVID, there was a huge urge for visibility, almost 60%. That has been dropped down to 40. So what's the overall take if you look at the graphs in the past were higher than this year?
Yeah, I think there's also maybe a little bit of a psychological effect for this specific question, in terms of if you have things already well organized, then maybe you're less likely to flag it as a key capability. Next to indeed what you're already mentioning, right? I mean, visibility a few years back with Corona was a really hot topic. That's not there, although it's still, let's say, the number 1, but it's not as dominant as it used to be.
Yeah. Well, clear. And I think the digitalization efforts in the last few years has also supported that the capabilities are more and more there. So that's also one thing. Next, you see the shipment visibility today. Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, and I think here indeed, I think your last comment, Martijn, is spot on here on the left side, right? We're asking them how they see shipment visibility today, and we've seen the real-time tracking, so the really GPS tracking increasing, right? So year on year, we see more companies that actually have that in place. So that's a clear signal that we also see that in the number of customers that we have. So in that sense, it correlates nicely with our own customer base, but still good to see that increase. On the other hand, if you look at the left picture and the graph, it's still an amazing large amount of companies that are using spreadsheets, email updates, or even call carriers for status updates, right? So yes, nice for improving. We clearly see that, but yeah, ideally, the spreadsheets and calling or even using of status portals should be way lower in our ideal world, at least. And then the right side of the slide is more focused on, hey, which transport modes can better improve in terms of the visibility needed. Where we've seen this year that the LTL is the number one spot. Potentially that's also related to the fact that for the full truckloads, for more companies, the GPS tracking is in place. Of course, it's still number two, so it's still important, but a little bit less than last year's. And again, I think you mentioned it as well, Martijn, that we see here in the US or the North American side that the full truckload is a bit more the number one versus Europe.
Yeah. To the left, so the real-time GPS tracking has going up by 8%. So that's well, significant, I would say. And what I also see in the last few years is more and more software companies are using telematics from the trucks itself. So that's also improving. So before that, they were relying on data from the logistics service providers or the carriers, and maybe they were using data from telematics. So in all the trucks and all other vehicles, cargo vehicles, you have some sort of telematics, and with that connection, you get also a way higher reliability and also with GPS. So that's way more detailed than say 5 years ago. So that's also one trend what we see reflected on this data.
Yeah. Yeah, the technical capabilities, I mean, indeed, the telematics devices are, or sometimes you can also use the onboard units from trucks, for example.
Yeah.
It's in essence, let's say in North America, Europe, that should be close to 100%.
Yeah.
So in essence, you could track everything. Yeah, but it's good, an 8% increase from 1 year to the other. I think is already a nice step.
Yeah, but still, again, what you mentioned, the more than 40% using spreadsheet and email updates, that's worrying me a bit. And calling carriers, etc., that's outdated way of working. But and I expect, in a larger sense, we are between two macroeconomic waves. And that's the time where you have creative destructions where companies fall off the wagon. I think, in a few years' time, you will hardly see that anymore, because the companies who are still doing that, they will go bankrupt or will be acquired. I think that will change, because the calling for this kind of purpose, that will change, and I expect it to change. So
yeah, and it's not here on the slide, right? But indeed, we saw again also a correlation between, let's say, the companies that are financially performing better and their real-time tracking or the number of spreadsheets. So indeed, you're right. The companies that are performing worse, they are doing more manual stuff.
Yep.
And therefore more likely to maybe not exist a few years from now.
Yeah. So on the right-hand side, you mentioned briefly, the truckload, the full truckload has dropped 16%, 16. Overall, if you look at your installed base, so you have a lot of data and you see what's happening. And you mentioned earlier, you see dips and rises in the last quarters. Do you also see these kind of trends between modes, transportation modes?
Yeah. So and indeed we see trends in a sense that indeed we're what we're tracking, right? So for sure, I think it's started in the majority with the full truckloads, and there's more and more demand now to have more detailed insights on indeed the LTL, but also, for example, on parcel. But those two, right, are more restricted to status updates. Although I have to say some carriers are extending let's say, the number of status updates, right? So it's not they're not allowing us to real-time track their trucks, which then also would be difficult if they make multiple stops to give an accurate ETA to our customer. But we're getting more data on what the actual ETA is. So in that sense, there's also some improvement for those transport modes.
Yeah, and you have to also take into consideration that in the US, the supply chain or transportation chain is different than in Europe. If you are having a ship moving into your goods into Rotterdam, and then mostly by road, it goes to a European distribution center. That most of the time that's a short trip. Whereas in the US, when you land at Los Angeles or Long Beach or New York, it takes a while before your stuff from the boat to the distribution center. That takes a while. So you see, in that lag, there's more need for visibility compared to Europe.
Yep.
And that's also reflecting. And that's also because in the Northern American space, they will need that kind of updates from the harbor to their distribution center. Now, moving on to the technology implications. So maybe you can comment on this. Oh, here he is.
Yeah, so here we asked the participating companies to really give their opinion on what they expect in the next 2 years in terms of what's now really the most important or the greatest value of a TMS capability for your company, right? So they're looking forward here specifically. And it's quite aligned to what we saw earlier, right? If they say, hey, what's important today? So we don't see a big shift here, as we still see visibility and performance management as two key drivers. But yeah, I think we also see in sustainability again on number 4. So those are important capabilities also for the next 2 years. There's not a huge difference between the different capabilities, right? Which I think in itself is also an interesting finding. So yes, visibility and performance management scored higher, but still, for example, the execution of carrier communications is also important for companies, right? So there's not one single TMS capability that is really 10 times more important than the others, I think. And that's also what we see in our discussions, right? It's important that we have a complete TMS that has all the capabilities, the network, the performance management, the visibility, etc., combined in one tool. I think that's also what we see reflected in this answer.
What is missing, and maybe that's my outside-in view, how a TMS is supporting the business. How do you make sure that with the right transportation management, you make sure that your stocks are on the shelf at the right time, and maybe the commercial part of how is it supporting your growth, or how is it making sure that your stuff is available at the right time, either at the store or at your customer, and that might be a factory needing your raw materials, whatever, or parts. So this is still very much related in a logistical sense, and not so much in a commercial sense. So maybe also we should add some new options to answer for next year. How does it supporting your business to some sense? And
No, for sure. Yeah, and I think what we discussed earlier, right? On the working capital, it might be a good one. I'll check with the team later to see if we can make that also explicit in our benchmark and get some data on it. At the minimum, at least we try to share with everybody that that's also a way to look at their TMS and the impact that it can have. So I think it would be good to highlight that in a specific question. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you talk to the supply chain world of people, that all talk about OTIF, on time in full, and how good are you at that key performance indicator called OTIF. Although it might be not one indicator, but it's a mix, so it's on time and in full. So that's OTIF. But OTIF is a magic KPI in supply chain world among cargo owners, so the manufacturing company especially. So to what extent does your TMS support your OTIF, targets, etc.? So that it's something we should relate also in that sense, because that's the common KPI among supply chain people. So that's something we should maybe consider more in the future.
Yeah, so for sure. So for us, that's part of what we would call in performance management.
Yeah.
And we have extensive functionalities, and it starts with getting the data right. And at Descartes, we have the tracking as really a native part of our TMS. So we track all of our customers. They can in detail track and automatically flag right when a truck is arriving, because there's a geofence around the customer location or the warehouse or wherever the truck is going. So one is gathering all that data in the most detailed way that you can imagine. And then the second part, indeed, well, then you can use the data, and we have many standard analytics reports on what's the performance per transport mode, per lane, per carrier, per forwarder, and those are used often in conversations, monthly reviews with those carriers and forwarders to discuss their performance and decide if they want to continue the collaboration. So it's a critical KPI indeed that we gather a lot of data about, and also create a lot of insights that are being used in the day-to-day operation of our customers.
So we have 3 minutes to go. So and we get to the last slide. So we're almost on time. But so what are technology implications? So can you tell us about the maturity of technology?
Yeah, and I think we let's say put two questions on one slide, and I think maybe first focus on the left one, and we touched upon it slightly earlier, right? So how mature is your transportation technology adoption? I think there we saw the 17% that's citing it as fully automated. And then so the main part not being fully automated. Now, earlier had a discussion with someone said, but not everybody's saying they're fully automated. I think what's interesting that you can see that the ones with a leading financial position, they see fully automated at 51%, right? So there's a huge difference versus the performance of a company and how automated they're working. I think it's really, really a huge difference. So another, great incentive, I would say, for people to maybe look a bit more closely at transportation management and see what it can bring. So I think that's one interesting insight on the left. The other, of course, is there's still so many companies out there that have little or only partial automation, and that's also what we saw earlier, right? The Excel sheets, the emails, the calls. They're still for quite a lot of companies common practice, unfortunately.
And it can be a huge hassle to do this, all these mails and these calls to get it all arranged.
No, and it's often a sort of a hidden workload that people are busy. Maybe they outsource it to a team somewhere in a low cost country, and it's not no longer really visible. But the delays and the suboptimal process is unfortunately then still there. I think on the right hand side, right, on the generative AI adoption, we already concluded earlier. It's top of mind for a lot of people, right? So a lot of companies are busy with it. I think with 96%, so that's quite a big number, I would say. And if you can then see it let's say the use cases that are typically using it a lot around data entry, right? We have a lot of cases where companies are busy with, well, sometimes translating those emails into data in a TMS, right? That's one of the things that they're trying to do. But also other things where AI is enriching certain data fields. So there's quite a lot of experiments going on in the data entry domain. The route and load optimization, I think that's an area where well, AI or machine learning already for a longer time is playing a dominant role in helping companies to optimize, as you might want to recalculate those parameters every few hours to optimize really your planning, and that's then nice if that can be solved by a computer. Well, you can see there's a lot more of other use cases as well that companies are playing around with generative AI. It might be less even for some in the future, I could imagine, although now I think it almost all capabilities there will be some form of AI involved.
Overall, when I look at this graph on the right, this could be an inspiration for companies, to sell this AI tool internally. So where do we expect to have the best savings or the best improvements? So take this graph and look at it, and where do you see the biggest hurdle or hassle internally, and then you can apply this kind of new tooling with generative AI to improve it. So that's one thing. Elmer, we're actually out of time, but the good news is we have an extra 30 minutes if people want to have an extra conversation. So like I said, Elmer and I will be there and have you can ask this question. We will be sitting at table 1. It's easy to get there, and we won't bite. So if you have more questions, you please join us at the table 1. There's more to read. You can download, or you can go to the IT Super Map to have more interesting insights in all the vendors in supply chain. And next, you see on the right-hand side, you see the survey findings. You can download these. You find it in the PDF of this webinar, but you also can have a look at the report itself with way more qualitative explanation around it. So Elmer, thanks for now. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your explanation.
Yeah, great to be here. Let's go to the Q&A.
Yeah, and thanks for now, people. Thank you for watching either live or in a recording. And for the people live, I hope to see you either in the virtual lounge or maybe next time. Thanks for now, and bye bye.